Good afternoon and welcome to State of Sponge 8. It's our first of 2016. Currently it is Jeeden speaking, and I'm one of the sponge leaders for the Sponge Project. And with us we've got a whole bunch of people today, and we've got a whole bunch of stuff that we're going to be going through this list. So to go from the top, we have Doctor with us, who is the CFO of the Sponge Foundation. I'm not sure if he's here with us to chat, though.
Oh, yep. Hello.
Yeah, there he is. We've got Gabazo here with us, who is a fellow Sponge leader.
Hello.
We have Mumphrey with us, who is handling all of the streaming for us today, as well as works on the mixing technology.
Good evening.
We have Aaron with us today, who's going to be someone that's going to be speaking, as well as does a lot of API and implementation development.
Hello.
We have Demon here with us, who is likewise going to be speaking, as well as does world generation.
Hello.
We have Inscrutable here with us, who will also be speaking today, as well as handles the docs.
Glad to be here.
Got Owen here that handles all the community.
G'day all.
And we have ZML, who handles doing commands, and like Aaron and Demon, works on the implementation as well as the API.
Hello.
As well, today we have our contributors with the Sponge Project, and I'm going to go through them. They're kind of sitting with us today, and they'll be part of the broadcast later. But we have Gravity Fox, who does Fox Guard on the forums. We have Client Hacks, who, as many of you know, won the plugin competition. And he does Jukebox, as well as comes from Pixelmon for those that use the Forge mod. We also have Saldoc here with us, who works on the Sponge docs with Inscrutable. We have TZK here with us, who also works on the Sponge docs. And I forgot Simon. Oops, I forgot Simon. Simon is also with us. He works on the API and implementation. He will not be speaking, but he's definitely here with us today. So that should... Oh, and we have Luke GB here with us too. And he won't be speaking, but he's the guy that makes everything continue running behind the scenes. So, and lastly, we have Hassan here with us. He does essential commands on the forums, and he's another one of our contributors. I think I got everyone with that, so I think we're good. So with that, let's get the show on the road and let's move on to the next part. So, as many of you now know, and from our announcement that happened on December 31st or January the 1st, depending upon where you're at, we have now moved into the beta phase. So it's taken us a while, and we know that people have been waiting for us to finally get confident enough to put a build front and foremost and say it's beta ready. But starting with build 1000 of SpongeForge, I went ahead and put the entire ecosystem into beta status. And basically what that means is at this point, I'm pretty comfortable with you taking SpongeForge on a Forge server installation and running your server with it and actually being able to play the game and have people play the game with you. I don't think it's going to completely blow your server up, though. There's obviously going to be bugs. And I wouldn't say it's 100% stable, because obviously we're not in release yet, but at this point it's semi-stable. For those that have been in the community for a very long time, know that when Bucket was starting to get going, I think they actually went and called themselves beta around build 1000 as well too. So if you can think of it like that way, if it helps you understand what this new tag means. So with beta phase, there's been a couple of changes made to how we structure the project. The first big one, and the one that's become apparent for some of us, or some of you that work on the project with us through PRs, is the new versioning layout. I'm going to let Demon kind of talk about that briefly and what's going to be coming in the future with that.
All right. Well, yeah, obviously with the update to
beta, we switched over to Semver and actually enforcing the principles behind it. So that means we have a major, minor, and patch version. And the only real important one is that every time we introduce breaking changes into a release of the API, we have to increment the major version. And to help us, we've changed up some of our branch layout in all of our repositories so that master, while still a development branch, now is strictly for non-breaking changes. And we have a bleeding branch, which will contain breaking changes for our next major release, as well as a release branch, which contains the last release copy of our code so that we can make hotfixes off of that. This is really just to help our ability to be able to still work on stuff which would be breaking changes and not force ourselves into making major version increments every time we want to do a release, even if we just have some hotfix or minor stuff to increment. Like that's everything.
And I know that you're going to be getting a page up with basically, or did you already get that page up? Which basically goes into great detail about what you can expect from the new versioning layout.
Yeah, we have a page in the docs in the works to go over how our branches work and how our system works for moving stuff between them and getting stuff into releases.
You can bring that up on the stream machine.
Yeah, if you want to just if you want to bring that up, Demon. And then there we go. Yeah, so you, as you'll be able to see, Demon has went into quite extensive detail on basically the entire version layout, what these different terms mean, and how we're going to structure our branches and stuff and such going forwards. And really, the reason why we're going through this entire system is to make it where plugins will have the least likelihood of breaking if they stick to released builds, but still be able to hand down hotfixes where appropriate. During the alpha phase, we basically, it was kind of the wild west, so to speak. We would just, anyone and everything would just get pushed to master, and it's very rapid development. And in the alpha phase, it made sense because if plugins break, I mean, they'd break because they're targeting a product that's not even in beta status. But obviously with beta, things have to change. So that's where we're going to. And speaking of releases, during the beta phase, we will also be moving to rolling release, which means that for those that followed us since the beginning, you'll notice that we've only did 3 big releases of SpongeAPI, 1, 2, and 3. And those have been separated many months apart. I think the release between 2 and 3, or the time I should say, was April to December. So that was quite a bit of time in between the two. With rolling release, basically when things are good to go, when we've wrapped up a whole bunch of breaking changes, we'll just go ahead and push a new release of it. Obviously, our next release will be 4.0 or 4.0.0 of the API, the next big one, I should say. And that one's timetable on that will probably within the next 2 to 4 weeks is when that one will get released. So that's a much bigger release schedule versus the other one, or a much better one. As far as builds of SpongeForge, for those builds, we will be marking stable builds on a fairly frequent basis. When we get a new build that fixes a bug or two that's been pretty big, then we're just going to go ahead and star a build, and those will be shown on the Forge page. The files at MinecraftForge.net/SpongePowered, and you'll be able to go there and grab the latest starred build, which is considered to be a stable build by us. And we hope that we'll be able to, on a fairly frequent basis, to continue to star builds and and have you guys share back any problems or any feedback that you may have. So moving on now, let's start talking about some of the API updates that have happened since the last state of Sponge. And I think we'll go ahead and kick it off with Aaron talk about some of the things that he's done for scoreboards.
So, for those of you who do follow scoreboards at all, which isn't many of you compared to other parts of the API, I've made some changes to scoreboards for our latest release. So, some of it's just fixing up some long-standing bugs in the implementation. So, if you've been using the vanilla/scoreboard command, everything should now work as normal. And then finally, in the API, I've made some changes to team, for example. Team is now just on one scoreboard at a time. I'd previously supported adding a single team to multiple scoreboards, but it didn't really end up working out and didn't really make sense with what team was. However, you can still add objectives to multiple scoreboards. So if you, for example, have two different players, each displaying their own scoreboard, you can set it up so that the same objective is displayed for both of them, and then give each player their own custom objectives. Now, moving on to economy, some of you might have seen that we've recently added an economy API, which I'd finished up based off of Sleeker's initial work. Those of you coming from Bucket might have used Vault or something, but we've decided to integrate economy right into the API itself. We'd seen a lot of economy plugins popping up on the forums, and this gives like a standardized way for plugins to interact with economy. So I think it was Hassan's Chest Shop or Admin Shop plugin that can just use the economy API to charge players or users and not have to worry about which actual plugin is providing that, be it, say, Total Economy or Economy Lite. Now, unlike other parts of the API, like permissions, there's no default implementation of this. So, with permissions, for example, if you don't install a plugin like PermissionsX, you still get some basic permission things using off levels. But with economy, since vanilla doesn't really have any concept of an economy, then you'll need to install some sort of economy plugin in order for plugins that use it to work. We already have some of our plugin devs on the forums updated their plugins to use the economy API. So Total Economy and Economy Lite come to mind, and we're already starting to see new plugins both implement the economy API and start to use it. So feel free to check that out on GitHub or on the Java docs, and let us know if you have any feedback. We're always looking for ways to make the API better and more user-friendly for plugins.
And it sounds great. And the one thing I just want to mention real quick before we move on to catalog types is with the interface for economy sitting within Sponge API, there will be no need for something like Vault to be created and added for Sponge. Now, since that's within the core, there won't be kind of this must-have, must-rely-on plugin that was so rampant throughout Bucket, which is something that I definitely wanted to solve with Sponge. So now up to you, Gabby.
Thank you. So with the addition of, well, a few months back, I had to basically restructure the entire Sponge game registry to use what we call registry modules. And what happened was basically the capability to register new catalog types was partially supported as long as you used the implementation. But now, as of a few days ago, I've added the ability for plugins to register their own catalogs and their own catalog types. Let me find a gist that I created. The basics of it is that you can expose your own catalog type and it'll be registered with a game registry. And yeah. Damn. How can I get this to paste? There we go. The basics is that plugins can provide their own catalog types, and if you want your catalog type to be extendable where other plugins can add more of that catalog type, it's perfectly well possible to do so. And that just has been posted in the stream as well for people to see and take note. This does not allow plugins to provide catalog types from the API, because, let's be honest, that's not what it's intended for. All of the catalog types that are provided by the API are already registered and provided before plugins are even initialized for static initialization. I think that's about it.
Now, what would be an example of a catalog type, a custom one, off the top of your head?
Well, for example, if you had a skills plugin that had various skill types, you could make a skill type catalog, a skill type extend catalog type, and provide the basic skill types in your plugin API.
And then the good thing that you can do, off the top of my head, and the reason why this is such a nice system, is that if you were to add them as catalog types and they get registered, then another plugin that wants to add support for your plugin, they only need to look up from the game registry for the name of your catalog type. You don't have to provide some kind of front-facing pseudo-enum API-like class in your plugin to do this. They'll just be in the game registry, and they can do a simple string lookup for the class.
Right.
Very simple.
The other thing is that, well, you kind of have to be careful about that, because since you have the class reference, if that plugin class does not exist at runtime, because it's a plugin dependent, soft dependencies, more or less, then you really have to be careful that you handle those dependencies correctly so that you don't get class not found exceptions, and basically your server admins come back complaining to you, hey, your plugin's breaking my server.
Right, no, that makes complete sense. That's fair. But that's probably one of the best uses for it, though, is to, you don't have to have that sort of system in play. Sponge handles it for you, so. But that's pretty much it for the catalog types, and let's move on back to Aaron again for replaceable services.
So if you've looked at the API before, you might have seen the concept of service. So after one of our most recent refactors, a service basically represents anything that can be replaced by plugins. So the obvious examples are, of course, economy service, which I talked about, permission service, and I believe user storage service. So after the 3.0, well, with the 3.0 release, it's now possible to replace a service no matter what time it was registered. Previously, you would have to try to figure out somehow what phase a service was registered, such as the built-in permission service, and register years before it. Now, though, you can replace it at any time. So, for plugin-provided ones, such as economy, you might want to check in your plugin if the service already exists, so that you don't overwrite another service if, say, there's multiple economy plugins installed. But for built-in ones like permission service, it's usually safe to just provide your own, because the default one isn't very useful, or it might not exist.
I'd like to add a note about that. If, for example, plugins wanted to replace something like the user storage service, they still have to follow the contracts dictated by said service, such that the service is not constantly querying Mojang's API for game profile lookups, for example, because there are hard limits enforced not by us but by Mojang services themselves. Something about 1,000 lookups per minute or something.
That sounds about right.
So as long as the plugin developer knows and understands the contracts that are not directly enforced but written in either the documentation on the service itself or the other services that they use, they should be perfectly well suitable.
Right. So moving on now, well, let's go right back to Gavazo for data versioning.
Yay. So data, I think most people are aware now that there's some obscure interface called data serializable, and they never really understood what that does. Basically, what I believe everyone is well aware by now that most everything in Minecraft is serialized to NBT. And NBT is kind of this neat format of just a string to object mapping. And what we've seen in one of the snapshots a few months back is that there's been some changes in some of the data format, in the format of the data within those NBT compounds for certain things like potion effects that are being silently upgraded on world load and on when the NBT is read. And that got me thinking that, well, hell, if the implementation is supporting this, the API most definitely will need to support something like this as well, not only for things that we provide, but if a plugin creates custom data, like a custom data manipulator, that is being serialized to item stacks, entities, or tile entities, and some version thereafter changes the format of deserializing that custom data, there needs to be some sort of upgradable path for the previous content. And basically that's the summation of data versioning, where any data serializable has a content version, and there's registration for data content updaters, so to speak, that you can provide going from one version to the next version or jumping between two different versions, such that the serialization management in the implementation will handle it successfully.
Yeah, and now it's about to say, really, the long and short of it is this is a means to, if you write a plugin and you have custom data and you realize after the plugin's been released, you're like, oh crap, this data is not correct. It needs to be migrated. For instance, maybe you thought that integer values for a certain piece of data would be just fine. But down the road, you realize, maybe by request or maybe due to your own code or just own review, that I need to move this to, now I need to move it to double values. I need to update this data to another format. Well, that's where the data versioning would come into play, and using the data updating system that Gavazo put into the API would be for you. It gives you the capability to migrate the old integer data to the new double data and get it saved back on there. And this is not a new concept. I mean, other projects that give you the ability to do custom data on various different things would have the same concept. But we definitely needed something here with people that are going to now start looking towards, this is what we can do with vanilla, but what can we do on our own? And when we say custom data, that can be many different things. I mean, you can store, if you had let's take mana. Mana is a good example. So if you did a skills plugin and you gave players mana values, the mana would be stored as custom data. And let's say that, you decided to do integers at first, but later on, you actually wanted to do double values. You changed how you do your calculations for mana cost. Well, now, all of a sudden, you need to account for those old mana values and fix them. So you would do your new piece of data for the double mana values, and you would do a data upgrader to grab, or updater, to grab the old value and migrate it to your new system. And then that would be versioning the data and stepping it up.
Right, and the contract is that currently the contract is that the same data container is being used or recycled. So if anything, for example, you'd just be overriding the data, and you wouldn't be constructing a new data container, because that's just asking for
Right, that's a fair point too.
yeah.
So,
It's one of the few places where we have to reuse the same object in the API.
yep.
Sadly.
So that's pretty much it for data versioning. We're going to go ahead and move on to the world generation API changes made by Daemon.
All right. Around 2 weeks ago, I merged in some world generation changes. Most of the structure is already there. If you've taken a look at it, we have this system of generation populators and populators, which allow you to make changes to the world generation without completely replacing it. As often the case, you just want to add some small feature or something. You don't want to have to overwrite the entire world generator just to do that. Also, 2 weeks ago, we got all the implementation in for the first phase. The first phase was populators, which is after the chunk is actually generated, populators are applied, which apply features like trees or bushes. So all the implementation of that is in, so you can go ahead and write plugins. I don't think we have any examples yet. I'm still working on finalizing some documentation for that, but yeah, it's all there to play around with. We have some more stuff coming soon, which will expand some of this functionality around generation populators. But
And one of the things to note on this is, just as an example, if you wanted to take like a desert well, that's a good example. If you want to take, because that is a populator, correct?
yes, it is.
Okay. So with the API, you can build a desert well object. You can configure some properties on it, and then you can add it to a list of populators that the world is going to use to populate chunks with. And does the populator configure the chance daemon, or is that?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay.
The desert well has a property on it for chance, for it to attempt to spawn per chunk. By default, this is 1 in 1,000, which is why they're so rare. But yeah, you can change that. You can also change what object it tries to place down, and you can change. I think that's all for the desert well. But we have all the vanilla features are interfaced out in the API, and they have these properties that you can change. So if you just want to change, say, the trees that spawn in a particular biome, you don't have to write your own populator to do trees. You can just use the vanilla populator and change some of the properties for what trees it generates.
Right. And we support building a vanilla populator from scratch using our builders. We also support modifying populators that are already applied. This is done through a world generator modifier. Basically, you'll get the populators. You can look through the list, find the one that you want. So for Demon's example, find a tree populator or whatever. Is it called Hughes tree? Because I know there's a few of them.
Well, there's just one populator for trees. It's the forest populator.
Oh, forest? Okay. So you would find the forest populator, and then when you grab that populator, you can just set attributes on it. And then whenever vanilla uses that populator to generate the world, it's going to use your changes. So we know in Bucket, you were only given a generator interface or world generator, and you were given a generator method. And it was probably the least amount of API possible, besides just not providing any. Because the sad part is that if you wanted to generate anything that was like vanilla generation, then you'd have to go and copy Minecraft code and put it into your plugin, and your plugin would become a Craft Bucket plugin in a hurry if you wanted to do anything truly extravagant with it. And we hope with this system that it'll allow people that are like myself, who are completely brain dead when it comes to world generation, actually have a shot in making something that's unique and something that's pretty cool. We also bundle a noise library with SpongeAPI, and it's called Flow. It's called Flow /noise, or I think they just call it noise now. And that library is used to basically generate the random values to kind of generate the terrain and give us some unique features. So using a combination of that, along with the math library from Flow, along with Demon's World Generation API, you should be able to put together something that's really cool and unique looking in a hurry. And this is just the first part of Generation API. We'll talk about later on in State of Sponge today about some upcoming features he has for it. So I think that pretty much wraps up the updates we had for the API since the last State of Sponge. Moving on now to the implementation update and what's been done since then. The biggest thing that has hit the implementation is Mumphrey submitted the first working copy of the inventory API implemented, and we're going to give him a few minutes to talk about what's happening there and where we're going to go from here.
Right. Well, to be honest with you, I'm not exactly sure how it works, so I'm probably not the best person to explain it. I think I've basically I've driven everybody nuts with this because I've rewritten it more times than I care to recount. But yeah, I mean, the core of the thing is in there. So all of the aspects of the inventory implementation that I wanted to be there to support how it's going to, grow into its sort of full implementation are there. So at the moment, you can get hold of player inventories, and you can run queries against them. Client Hacks has already broken it, but that's his, role in life is just to go in and break all the things. Yeah, I mean, essentially the whole thing's built from the ground up to be pretty abstract, and that sort of resulted in a lot of very small pieces that all come together to make it work the way that it's intended. So it sort of abstracts some ideas, which I mean, it's very much like the design itself. The implementation reflects the same sort of decomposition approach, which typifies my general method of solving problems. So, for example, the main aspects of the inventory that make it all work from our point of view are called lenses, which are basically target agnostic object which can allow you to look at a particular inventory. What that basically means is all of that stuff that I spouted off at and is on the screen right now in terms of all this kind of really abstracting away all the complexity actually happened, and if you're interested in looking at it, then the best place to start is to look at the lens implementation in Sponge Common.
I mean, they're both a really good read. Really good read.
Yeah, I one of my sort of high priorities right now is to Java duck some of the stuff, because it's all been a little bit too fluid up to this point to justify fully docking it. But now that it's nailed down with concrete poured on it and just generally not going anywhere, now I can basically start to document it a little bit more. And if any of you are familiar with my documentation style, you'll know that I don't really muck about when it comes to writing documentation for stuff, so you can look forward to some pretty Visio diagrams interspersed with occasional bits of text, per standard. Yeah, I mean, basically, it didn't. I'll be the first person to say it didn't turn out quite how I expected, but I'm really, really happy with how it works. Basically, it allows us to flatten the concept of the problem concepts that Minecraft has, where there's this sort of contamination of functionality between containers and inventories, to the point where you quite often hear people talking about a container as if it's an inventory. And so we that's actually encoded in the fabric of the implementation. Lol. That's a reference that nobody who's actually not read the implementation will get. So I don't know why I made that joke. Yeah, I mean, I don't know why I always struggle to explain this stuff when I'm put on the spot, because if you talk to me privately, I won't shut up. Is there anything you think I should say? Is there anything you'd like to?
Well, I guess the best way to show it is if we just do we have just a small series of code for showing it?
Well, what the best part is, despite sort of going through so many revisions, it actually ended up working exactly as I originally designed it to. As in, it's not like some of the other APIs where it's sort of been the API has adapted a bit to implementation realities. The implementation has come through, and everything that's in the initial PR description, which is a pretty lengthy read on its own, came true. So if you look at the code examples that I put there, so we've got, like I'm showing now, we've got the there is a spanning tree that you can traverse, so you can query individual slots, you can ask for particular slots. So if you look at, I think it's actually in the comments where people were asking for some examples of how it would work, down here somewhere. Yeah, so like, there you go, there are a few little examples. The idea being that it's an idiomatic approach to using the inventory rather than a systematic approach. So you don't really the point is you should write code that doesn't care about the inventory that it's interacting with, only the things you care about. So if you don't really care whether it's a player's inventory or a zombie's inventory or the inventory of some modded object, all you care about is slots which contain a particular thing or have a particular aspect. So things like if it's the output slot of a machine, you don't have to say cast down from a top level object. What?
Yeah, the question from and I was going to talk about that in a moment too.
Oh, see, this is the best part. So, like I say, everything from the front end where consumers deal with the API to the back end where actual manipulation happens and the underlying objects passes through lenses. And the reason for that is it allows the interaction logic to be completely decoupled from what it's interacting with. This basically means that even with a totally unknown inventory, you can at least interact with it in a kind of very basic way, so treat it as an ordered inventory. But the best part is, a mod which wants to provide support for our API doesn't have to implement our entire API, because all they need to do is provide lenses, which are really simple, straightforward building blocks that you literally just bolt together in a nice little hierarchy. So the hierarchies which I was showing on the screen a little while back, these sorts of things, all of this actually exists as a hierarchy of lenses. And the base adapters, which interact with those lenses, don't really give a crap about the lens structure that they're using. All they care about is the fact that they're taking requests from a plugin and they're passing it to the lenses to do their thing. And the queries don't care either, because they're just doing the same thing. They're using the lenses to figure out what slots they can have. So if, for example, a mod wants to support our API, you'd think that they would have to squash our, they'd have to add a dependency on Sponge, and then they would have to provide a whole complete implementation of our API. So, which is pretty hefty API, because each inventory has query capabilities and abilities to navigate its hierarchy, and there's a whole ton of stuff on there, which would be a real ball ache were you to have to implement it from scratch. Which you don't, because if you're a mod provider and a mod author and you want to provide API access to your inventories, all you need to do is provide the lenses. Even better, if you're not the mod author, but you so you gave the example there of Ethermod. If somebody wanted to write a plugin that provided lenses for the Ethermod, then you could have that as like a companion plugin, a helper plugin, and then all of a sudden you just need to compile that into your plugin, and you can interact with Ether inventories as well. Anything that the Ether mod adds to the default inventories will automatically be taken care of. It just won't be necessarily as queryable. So I don't know if that. I kind of went off on a ramble there, so apologies if if that's more confusing.
A good
now.
example I think that would be shown is can you show us just one of your kind of basic lenses that you did for vanilla?
Yeah, let's have a look. I want to go to Sponge Common. Pretty thing. What's
Hotbar
an interesting lens? Hotbar. No, it's just thinking. Grid is actually quite an interesting lens. Oh no, it's not. That's the. Where is it? Grid inventory lens impul. So this is a good example. This is basically a lens that can look at an inventory as a grid. So obviously all inventories are just flat arrays under the hood. But this lens, if employed, can allow you to look at a portion of the inventory. So it has all the things that you'd expect, like width and height, and obviously the stride for the rows, so that you can, if your grid is narrower than the actual inventory rows, then you can do that. And literally, this lens, you can see how simple it is. It just adds its own rows and columns when it is added. So by adding a grid lens to your inventory, you get all the rows and columns, as an added bonus. So that would be. I closed the tab. Yeah, in this example, you can see right there, inventory grid. Okay, it ended up being called grid inventory lens, and then you can see the rows and columns. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's not. I was reading a fair bit of what you'd done, and yeah, it definitely did seem like it was pretty simple to do one. And after you implement the lens, can you show where you register it at?
You don't register it, but so the way that all the lenses are used by adapters. So when you're interacting with an inventory, you're actually interacting with an adapter, and the adapter is what uses the lenses. So if we look at the human one, for example, why does this not working? I think I've broken GitHub. There you go, human inventory lens. So you can see how simple it is to compose a lens which itself has lenses within it. So like this one is made up of the main inventory, which you can see is a grid, the hotbar, which is obviously a hotbar lens, and the armor inventory, which is an ordered inventory.
I see the child right there.
So this one,
child.
this one is declared explicitly because we are at liberty to declare it in advance. However, the way that the adapters work is if they're not past a lens implementation in their constructor, they look to see whether the object itself implements an interface called lens provider, which basically allows the inventory itself to sort of provide lenses for itself without having to have a hard dependency there. Or you can do either. You could either declare a class like this, which just describes your lens setup, and then wrap that in an adapter, or you can be a lens provider and do it that way.
Okay, that makes sense.
So, like, my anticipation is that obviously all the ones that we implement will be like this. So there'll be explicit lens classes, because it's just very straightforward. But if a mod, for example, lens provider functionality is there, so that if a mod wants to do that, I think what we will end up doing is basically providing an artifact which contains the Sponge core, the Sponge API, and then these bridging classes that like the lenses and such, so that people can depend on that without having to depend on a particular implementation.
I think that would probably sound pretty good too.
It essentially would be a layer above Sponge Common, like Sponge Core or something like that. I don't know what we would call it.
Okay.
But we need to look into that at some point.
Okay. So
anything else you want to know?
Probably nothing else for now. I mean, obviously inventory is pretty technical, and the system that you have put in it's unique and probably one of a kind, and is probably the most advanced inventory system I've ever seen for this game. But even with the abstraction and such that are on top of it, the long and short of it is, no matter what, if you're given an inventory from vanilla, you'll be able to at least do basic querying. If the inventory has more advanced features that are being provided by the lens, then you'll be able to do some advanced querying, or be able to query for features of that inventory, such as properties. And if it comes down to you're provided a mod inventory and the mod has not provided any support from us, then either the mod or a plugin can provide a lens that will give Sponge more information about this inventory and allow you to do beyond basic querying. But the long and short of it is that you definitely will be able to, no matter what, be able to query any inventory that you're given for the most generic things, which is probably the most powerful feature of this system, because with the way inventories are done in Minecraft, and the system is really terrible. It's one of the worst parts of vanilla. But the way it is, then, when we first started doing this project, before the inventory API was even becoming a thing, it was kind of in the back of our minds about, of course we would be able to provide support for vanilla, but we didn't know how far we'd be able to do support for mod inventories in a very simple and easy to use manner. Well, now that support is in the core, and I definitely could not be happier with it.
There's a few other features that are really designed to kind of allow that soft coupling between plugins and mods as well. It's not in the implementation at the moment, but basically there's an extra query overload that takes a string. The idea being with that one that any property which, for example, is defined by a mod. So say you've got this ether mod and it declares a property called Fred. Obviously, you've got no way to query with that property because you don't have the property class Fred. You don't have the property class Fred in order to instance one. However, the string overload is basically designed, and there's a class in the API called coerce, which is for this purpose, to allow you to specify your query as strings, but basically specify a property which may or may not be available. So, like I say you've got this property called Fred, you could query for that in your plugin using strings instead of using explicit, hard objects. And then if the ether mod is present, then your query will succeed because it will be compiled to real properties provided they're registered.
Right.
That's not available right now, but it's kind of woven into the fabric of the thing. So. Okay.
So that's it for the inventory implementation. We're going to go ahead and move along here to some more stuff. Let's let Gabazo talk a little bit about data manipulator shoutout, where we're at with implementing data, and how much more we got to go.
So, I'm very happy to say that at least 70% of data has been implemented.
Holy cow. That much?
The day of beta release, apparently people thought it was the grandest idea to start submitting data implementation PRs. to which I say, curse you, because like hell are we going to be reviewing 10 different data implementation PRs on the day of the beta release without having been able to actually test them. But, not all of data has been implemented, even with those 10 data manipulator implementation PRs. There are still a few left over. Some of them are a little more complex than others, and some of them are still waiting on other API implementations. Namely, some things like statistics, attribute data whenever Aaron manages to actually fix scoreboards for real, and implement the re-add the attribute API. But also on a more serious note, for for tile entity backed inventories on item stacks. That's mainly because it's going to rely on some close discussion with Adam and myself to actually work out how that's going to be handled with the inventory API, because it's going to be kind of the first data manipulator that's going to actually be an inventory that's queryable for changes, and when offered to the item stack, it's serialized. Aside from that, I can say that the data implementation has already accounted for data versioning. But there are a few data manipulators that will change in the future, more for a shout out to towards 1.9. One example is passenger data is going to have to change from being a single entity snapshot to a list of entity snapshots, because of how Mojang is changing the structure of how passengers are handled. Aside from that, if you see a data manipulator that you want to use, if you see a key that is null still and you want to use it, feel free to actually ping me, Aaron, or any of the other contributors and core devs to see if you can make a contribution, because that's always going to be well accepted. And I've written more lines of code than I can count to make it as simple as possible to actually implement a data manipulator these days.
Yep. Very much so. But, the long and short is, the contributors, you guys are doing an awesome job stepping up and making it happen with data. And keep up the good work. Keep submitting the PRs. I won't lie that, the amount of PRs we got was pretty much overwhelming. And, we were trying to do a whole bunch of stuff ourselves. The 2 days leading up to beta is probably one of the most active times I've ever seen in an open source project with a team of this size before. It was pretty insane, and anyone that was trying to keep things up to date during that time, well, I feel bad for you.
Yeah, poor Hassan was having to update his plugin like every 3 builds.
Yep. That day was rough. And it was, from our perspective, it was even hard for us to keep up with the progress of each other because of everything that was getting submitted. So, definitely keep it up, keep submitting us some stuff. And we will definitely do our hardest to get the PRs reviewed and merged just as soon as we can. And, let's hope that maybe by the next State of Sponge, we might be looking at 90%, if not full completion of data, which will allow the contributors to really focus elsewhere as well. So, but moving on from that, so the last thing to talk about with the implementation is when we will do the update on SpongeForge to 1.8.9. So, as some of you know, Forge has went ahead and updated to 1.8.9 in their master branch. Minecraft lets me know that he has already upgraded Sponge itself, the ecosystem that is, to 1.8.9 and branches, and everything seems to be working fine. We just want to check to see if some of our mixing code is still working as what it should be. Once we do so, then we'll go ahead and merge that to master. You'll probably see that happen within the next few days, up to a week. We'll go ahead and do that. There's not really a huge pressing need to go to 1.8.9 from a server perspective, sees how Forge included most of the hack checks that were done within those few revisions, and we've included some of our own within Sponge itself. So if you have Sponge installed, then you're a little bit more protected on that front. From a developer's perspective, though, 1.8.9 is a huge shift for us because some of the stuff that was removed when Mojang goes and obfuscates their game or makes the code hard to read has now been restored to us. So it definitely helps us to be able to work on the projects a little bit easier. And that's basically about it. We don't know of any huge pressing bugs that Forge is hitting in their master branch. So at this point, it's really just us coming to review what we have and see if we want to get it merged in sometime soon. So that pretty much covers the implementation update. At this point, we're going to go ahead and open up the general state of Sponge server. And it's going to, let's go ahead and post a link to the chat so we can have people know that it is open and available to kind of go and play around on. Was the map and stuff provided by the folks over at the Voxel Box this time, Owen?
Actually, the
I think so.
Voxel Box guys helped decorate it. We had Kupo from
Oh!
Voxel Box come up and
Yeah.
give us some statues. But mostly it's actually a terrain control
let's give a
product.
big shout out to them for, basically we kind of brought them in last minute and said, hey, we want a cool looking map for the beta state of Sponge. What can you do? And I remember that they were in here last night, so a
they've
huge
got a
shout
fair
out
few
to.
statues.
So a huge shout out to, if you want to go ahead and do so, Demon, why don't you list off some of your team members that helped out with it?
Actually, it was just Kupo.
It was just Kupo? Okay.
Just her last night, yeah.
Excellent.
Army of
Sounds
one,
great.
though.
Which is pretty impressive for an army of one, yeah.
Yeah, I've heard that she is quite the builder when it comes to doing these maps.
She also provided us with 4 statues of Spongy in different renditions,
Very nice.
which I'm sure that Adam will be happy to give us a preview on the stream.
I'll go do a little tour.
Yeah.
Do you want to describe them? This one's
Sure.
the one that's like a luau.
Which one are you looking at?
It's got like a garland wreath on its head and
Oh,
a
yeah.
ukulele.
That's
The music
Banjo
Spongy.
Spongy.
That is awesome.
We had a working jukebox plugin provided by
No,
Client
no, it's
Hacks.
working.
Oh, it's working.
I think we fixed it.
Oh, did we fix
Well.
it? Okay.
Yeah, I got it working. It's a bit broken because of Simon, but it works functionality-wise.
Okay.
Well, how
Um,
about we take a look at that? Given that we're talking about the music Spongy here.
Take
Yeah.
a listen.
Adam, do your sounds go to the stream?
I can make them go to the stream just a sec. There we go.
What's the command, client?
I've
Okay,
got
actually-
one placed down at spawn.
Yeah, just come over to the music Spongy and we'll play it here.
Alright, hold on. To the music sponge. Looks like a peanut.
A peanut the size of a house.
Yeah, still a peanut. What song we putting on?
Whatever you like.
Let's put on Portal.
Okay. Border.
Need to turn my game sounds up, I think. No, it's a guide.
Oh no.
It
Lag.
stopped.
Did someone
Turn
take it?
my Windows volume up. That might.
Oh no.
Someone,
There we go.
When you take the
someone
disc
nicked
out-
it from the jukebox.
Here, let's maybe put up a
Okay,
top.
let's go for this instead. Someone keeps on thumping the jukebox.
People have permission to use the play song command.
Actually, just bring it up to the top of the spongy.
Yeah. Doesn't everyone have fly though?
Yeah, everyone does.
Oh,
So it doesn't really
We
help.
tell people not to touch it.
Encase it in glass.
Where-
Oh my god, what a pain.
Place it in barrier blocks.
Yeah, that could work. Can't
People
smack
do they
glitch.
have break
Very
permission?
Don't think so. The server would be a lot more in pieces if they did.
Will it work with glass on top of it?
Yeah, it should do. I gotta get the disc in it though, that would help.
TP yourself into it.
How can I do
Cut
that?
a hole in it. Just place it in there.
Glass!
Oh, somebody's trapped in there.
Oh well.
Awesome.
Did he...
Damn
I
it,
think he
Luke. No, folks, we just want to try and show off the plugin.
Yeah. The point is that we have a working jukebox plugin that is done almost with our entire API. The only part that is not is because of an inventory bug that is going to be fixed shortly. I say shortly when Memfree gets time after State of Sponge.
I was going to
because
say
he's-
when I'm not prepping for SOS. Pretty much.
Yeah, when he's not prepping for State of Sponge.
Really?
Aside...
Maybe you should have done this before you invited everybody on here.
Yeah.
Yeah, probably.
Why
Well,
don't we just...
Bedrock actually blocks it. I
Anyway,
did not know that.
let's continue the tour of sponges that
Yeah,
were
that's a good
provided by
idea.
Kupo. So we have the luau spongy,
I could just smack it inside Spongy.
and then we have over here we have the snowman spongy. I can't remember exactly why we have the snowman spongy, but
We're going to show off Winter Wonderland.
oh, meh.
That works.
And it
That
is
does
winter
work.
at one end of the world, isn't it?
Why is everyone dropping items?
And then
I believe someone set up a command block to
over
do that.
Here. I don't. Where are you, Adam?
I think the
I'm
TPS
trying
just
to
took a
keep-
plummet.
I'm trying to follow you. I don't know which one you went to.
I went to the pirate one.
Oh, okay, yeah, the one with the macaw on his head.
Yeah. The pirate spongy, because we've got a pirate ship somewhere around here.
It's... Where is the pirate ship?
Oh, it's on the other side of the island. Right next to, actually, evil spongy.
For Spongy.
Corporate spongy.
Corporate spongy.
Oh, there it
yes.
is. I flew right past it.
And then we have the, yes, as we were mentioning earlier, corporate spongy. Fully equipped with a monocle, top hat, and a mustache.
I can't... Oh, yeah, he's up there on the waterfall.
Yep. Yeah. So that's a community server that's actually being maintained not only by the Sponge staff, but also aided by Gravity Fox here.
Yeah, we have a dedicated Sponge community server now. So as soon as State of Sponge is finished, this server will be opened up for anyone to just play around and mess around on. We
And we do
also
have some volunteer
using it-
community staff too.
Yes, we have plenty of volunteer community staff. And we're also using this as a test bench. basically to make sure Sponge is working and make sure plugins are working, and to just help find bugs and such in general. So
It's been working
quite
well
useful,
too.
Yeah. So if you want to just hop on, it's still the same IP. We'll probably post a link to it when we post the State of Sponge video. And yeah, just feel free to mess around on it. No, please don't burn everything. I say with vain hope. But do we want to show off some other plugins that we've got going?
Now, what else do we have?
Obviously, we've still got command book as always. We have the Thor command. One sec, let me just hit Mumfrey with it.
I don't want to be hit with a lightning strike.
Too bad.
Ha! I need to turn shaders off if you want to see it. Shaders hide the lightning bolt.
Oh.
Oh yeah, well, I've got a bunch of other ones like Fox Core, Fox Guard, Graveyards, Kits, Polis. So obviously we're still a bit restricted in terms of plugins because we've just made a whole bunch of breaking changes as we've updated to beta. So hopefully as plugin developers notice that we've updated to beta, they'll come back and just update their plugins. I think a lot of them have broken due to the changes in the text API.
Yeah, there's been a couple. There was some big pushes right before beta.
But honestly, we've seen a huge growth in plugins on the forums of late. Also, that's in part due to the plugin competition which we were running just before Christmas.
Yep,
which Gravity
definitely.
Fox was the great winner of.
Well, Hacks was the winner of it, and then
Hacks was the winner, and
Gravity
Gravity
came in
Fox was
second
runner-up.
place.
I apologize.
Yep. So that's basically the demo server, and everyone can kind of log in and mess around with it. But we do have a couple more things to go here before we call State of Sponge close and go into Q&A. So I'm going to go ahead and move on along with this a bit. And Inscrutable, I'm going to give it to you to talk about docs and how overwhelmed you now are.
Oh, awesome, yeah. In case anyone hadn't noticed, there have been a couple of changes in the Sponge API in the last couple of weeks.
What? No.
Just a few changes.
Just a few. Just a little bit of tinkering at the edges here and there. And knowing the fact that it's really only about 5 or 6 of us that are actually active on the docs, we're going to need some help somewhere or a very long amount of time to be able to get ourselves out from under this pile. We're also got to work out what we're going to do about the versioning changes too, because we want to make sure we can maintain docs for older versions as well as for the current in development versions, and we've got to work out how to distribute that because we don't want to get people confused about what they're reading on the docs. There's going to be a debate amongst the doc staff about what we can do about that because there are a number of possible solutions and we want to go for the easiest one. Another important thing that's been developing is a contributing document, which mostly has been TVK's work, but everyone's laid into that, and yeah, hopefully that will be working as a guideline to show everyone exactly how you can pitch in and give us a hand on various things. I've also had to trim the GitHub group down too, because there are a number of people who just haven't been able to contribute over the last year and have done nothing in many months. So we've trimmed that down to the bare minimum of active people, and we will always welcome more. And speaking of which, I'd like to thank 12 Awesome Man for throwing in so much help lately. There's been a few other people too, Flibio and so forth, but as usual, TZK and Saladog have been bearing most of the brunt. I'd also like to thank Demon, Aaron and Minecraft too for throwing us bits and pieces.
But as always, if there's anything that people can help out with, then please do so.
Yeah,
as always, there's a slew of
you
issues that need to be resolved.
If you don't feel comfortable with just like writing Sponge, if you're not a Java developer, but you still know plenty of stuff about how to run a server, please just contribute. I mean, there's always room for more documentation. This is a big push we've been making. We don't want to just leave people hanging in the dark. We want to make sure everyone, if they want to know how to do something, that they can easily just go on the docs and find it. Encourage
basically,
them,
If you figure it out for
encouraging
yourself, then
freedom of information is a really big thing for us.
Also, I know we're not at Q&A yet, but I want to just answer this because it's very important. For Oliver there, where do we apply to help? Well, you don't have to. Don't apply. All you gotta do is just issue a PR to the Sponge Docs repo, and come join them in the Sponge Docs channel on IRC, and that's how you contribute to it. That's all you gotta do.
and we will be most welcoming. Indeed, the staff will go out of their way to help you contribute in any way you possibly can, even if you scratch it on a piece of bark and send it to us.
Question: how do I admin someone on the SCS server?
Promote user
Awkward
and then your name.
silence. Yeah, so feel free to join the channel Sponge Docs on Aspen@IRC. IRC. For those of you who are already in Sponge, it's just as simple as typing /join # and Sponge Docs. So yeah, feel free to hop on, talk around. And if there's anything that you feel that we're missing in Sponge Docs, you can also make an issue on our GitHub. So of course, if you're able to actually detail everything that needs to be fixed and just write your own PR, that's even better.
Okay. So let's move on now to talking about get a web update from OX.
Okay, well, as some of you noticed, our Java docs sadly went down just after we updated to beta. So LukeGB has been great and he's gotten those back up. If you go to jd.spongepowered.org, you'll see the latest Java docs for SpongeAPI version 3. Also, Luke has been great in helping contribute to OR. So I'll just post a link for everyone to take a look at that. Okay, so I've just posted in the Twitch chat. So github.com/spongepowered/or. That is our new plugin repository. We've been working on it some time. Currently, our plugins are being hosted just as forum threads and people putting their own links up, which is just a temporary solution, but honestly not quite ideal. So Luke was saying that right now he's just trying to get basic version management and documentation functionality done so we can get OR out the door and start moving plugins to be hosted on that system. So OR is revolutionary. If you've come from any other kind of plugin management system, there's going to be a lot of features that haven't been in there before, such as an API. We're still, however, quite early in development, so if anyone wants to contribute to OR, we're more than happy to help. Right now, LukeGB is pretty much the only person working on it, and I do believe he is probably just as overworked as the Docs team.
And Gradimax did mention that once he gets past the holidays and into the first quarter of next year, then he'll be able to go back to work on it as he has before. And he's gotten a couple people that have expressed interest in working on it. So he's trying to compile together some folks as an OR team to jump onto the project.
Yeah, so that would be great for getting all the extended functionality out of the way. Right now, the main focus is on just getting the basic functionality in so we can move all those plugin threads off the forums and onto a site actually designed to host them.
Yep.
So when OR is ready, we will make an announcement to everyone and we'll give plenty of details on how to help with that transition. Okay, so I think that's pretty much all I can say for OR. Onto the subject of social media sites. Anyone who's on the doc, can you just copy and paste those across? We have a Twitter account, which is @SpongePower. Feel free to tweet to that. We also now have a Facebook group, facebook.com/SpongePoweredMC. We do have a Reddit subreddit, reddit.com/r/SpongeProject. So that's been going for a while. I believe we have 1,700 readers on that. So feel free, if you're a Redditor, to just hop on and post questions and stuff on that if you don't particularly want to use the forums. Though, of course, we do encourage everyone to use the forums if you want to get a quick reply. Also, the Sponge staff do frequent reddit.com/r/admincraft. So if you're posting questions about Sponge on that, you will probably get a reply. And I think that's about it for all the social media stuff. We will be posting updates, like all the links to latest Sponge announcements on that. We will always post the announcements directly on the forums, but we will always link them across our social media sites for those of you who use those more frequently. That way everyone can stay in the loop more easily. If there's any other sites you think would be appropriate for us to try and reach out on, feel free to let us know.
All right. So our last entry for today before we close out State of Sponge and go to Q&A is going to be what you can look forward to moving past the beta release, and what new features, and basically what are our plans going forward. And there's a couple of things I'm going to share today. Obviously, we've got a whole bunch of stuff always going on, and we'll continue as we always are, of taking in tickets, getting stuff fixed, getting people to try out new builds, and working with our plugin devs to get their plugins up and going. But our biggest series of features that are going to be upcoming during the beta phase are going to be, there will be a big change coming to the cause system and events. Basically, in just a few words, this is just going to be the separation of the thing that caused the event and any kind of other data that would help you do something with the event a bit more. So if you use the example of a sheep eating some grass, and let's say that it was a sheep that I spawned, then the sheep would be the cause of the dirt block being placed due to the grass being eaten. And I would be an owner of the sheep, and I would be the contextual data of the event. So I wouldn't be the cause of it, the sheep would be, but I would also be involved. That way you could say, oh, so, if Jiden's sheep eats grass, then let's explode them because he wasn't supposed to let them do that. So that's a good example of it. And for world generation, if you just want to say a few words for what part 2 is going to have, Demon?
Yeah, we're just trying to expand some of the vanilla generation that we're exposing, make it easier to modify things like caves or structures, like villages, strongholds, things like that. Just exposing more vanilla to make it easier.
And I think the one thing I do want to make sure that people are aware of for the next few big features to come to World Generation API is being able to build a structure, be it a vanilla one or your own structure, and being able to place it into the world. So that means I'll be able to build a stronghold and be able to customize the stronghold's attributes a little bit and then just place it, or do the same thing with fortresses. And then I will be able to take those structures I built and add those to, if it's a fortress, then I'll be able to add that to the normal generation, correct, Demon?
Absolutely.
There you go. And that's what I'm waiting for. Because fortresses in the overworld, yes. I cannot wait for that. That's going to be great.
There's also going to be the possibility someone might be able to provide some sort of plugin that gives a new structure, like, I don't know, a sponge fortress.
Yep.
Because
that
that's
too.
definitely not
custom ones.
That's definitely not too tacky.
No, not at all.
The next one will be I will do the second part of the AI framework. As was discussed, I believe at the last State of Sponge, and I didn't really touch on it too much from here because I haven't done anything else with it since. But with AI Framework Part 1 and Part 2, we'll be dealing with bringing the Pathfinder up to the API, as well as being able to customize the Pathfinder for a particular entity, as well as be able to change some of the senses attributes. So basically what you'll be able to do is generate a truly custom AI using it. You'll be able to make entities go to a certain spot. They'll avoid obstacles, which you'll be able to customize. They'll avoid hazards, which you'll also be able to customize. And yeah, that's kind of my grand plan, to give a fully featured API that makes something like Citizens completely a breeze to do. All they would do is implement their own custom AI task using the Pathfinder with customizations. And then you can have like NPC guards monitor a town and have them go and attack monsters that are getting close by. And it's just, the amount of uses for this are completely mind-boggling. And we'll also continue to interface out the vanilla API and provide more tasks that you can customize. As it stands right now, you can already, I don't have too many of the vanilla interfaces or the vanilla API interfaced out, but you can configure like the run speed of monsters as they walk around. You can make some entities actually scared of other entities if they have that task by default. You can add new tasks to their list. You can grab new tasks. You can also mess around with mod added tasks because I throw events for this, and it's just, I could continue to go on and on here about the stuff added in the AI framework, and I really don't think anyone else in the past has even bothered to do this. I don't think Bucket even had the concept of tinkering around with the AI whatsoever, unless I'm mistaken. But, so yeah, there'll probably be a part 2 and part 3 of it, but definitely watch out for part 2. That'll be coming very soon. So now ZML has some command API changes he's going to make.
Yes, I'm going to be making just a few more changes to the command API. Meaning I will add some argument types that a lot of people have been asking for, and also just a little touch-up, cleanup work so that the commands are easier to write for everyone. I've got some of this work already published, but there's a few more things coming up, mostly around argument parsing. For most developers, it shouldn't break much, but if anyone has custom argument types in their plugins, that'll be breaking. But yeah, mostly it shouldn't break plugins and make life easier.
Sounds good. Actually, I'm going to swap the next two around because I'm going to talk about some client stuff last. So Gabazo has some contextual data.
Yeah, so in the past, in past versions of the API, there were some additions to data, specifically like invisibility data, where there was a map of a UUID and whether the entity would be rendered invisible for those player unique IDs. And while it's always been intended that that wasn't going to just stay forever, and what would happen instead is something to be more contextual for other data holders. So like you can get the context data for a specific player or list of players, and modify that context and propose display name changes and visibility, rendering, and basically there are a few other things that can be done. But Kashyyyk has since opened an API PR that is still waiting because I haven't had enough chance to experiment with the implementation, see about any necessary changes that may need to come in, or any possible changes. But essentially, it's just going to allow something like Vanish No Packet to really not have to exist, because plugins will natively be able to check, is this, is Jaden invisible for Gavizoo, by querying, for the contextualized invisibility data for that specific case, or for a list of cases.
And if I can add one thing, there would still be a need for some sort of manager plugin like Vanish No Packet. So some plugin that provides commands to make yourself invisible to all people or to a specific person. But
Of
all of
course.
the actual logic to make that happen would be in the API. So it wouldn't need to do any hackery with NMS. It would just be completely supported by Sponge.
Right,
And of course, as
and
Gavzu
we do the
Oh, sorry.
same thing for the multi-world changes as well. That full system's in place in Sponge, and the only thing you really need to do is just have a set of commands along with some of your plugin's own unique features.
Right. One thing about the contextual data is that I have to consider the possibility of whether custom data is going to be accepted, and whether any of it is going to be serializable to player instances. Because as several users of Vanish No Packet may remember, it was only specific, by default it was only a permission check that enabled and disabled whether other players could see vanished players. But I can expand on that when the API PR is closer to being merged.
Sounds good. So the last one on the list, and this one is a heavy one, and I know that some people will be like, that they'll actually like hearing this, but I will go ahead and say that I'm not sure if I'll start it in Q1 or Q2 of 2016, but I will be starting to add the capability to Sponge API to start doing client-side resources. What this means is you'll be able to take the API and actually create a block or a new item from it without having to touch any of Minecraft's code. And I cannot stress that last few words I said. You'll be able to do it without needing to have any of Minecraft's code. Basically, what'll happen is there'll be a class that you will extend from Sponge API, and you'll be able to you'll be able to implement all the methods from it, and then that blocker item will be magically made a real Minecraft blocker item. Now, this plugin will still have to exist on the person's client with the Sponge mod installed, but you won't have to actually deal with having to deal with the Minecraft internals of creating a blocker item. Because it's kind of annoying to do it. There's a lot of stuff that you have to be made aware of. And I know from working on another project with Dr. called Almira that doing blocks and items, whereas it's simple, it's annoying to do really nice stuff with them. There's no really nice, pretty API layer on top of it. So we're going to do it. And I have a lot of ideas in my head for how it wants to be done, or how I want it to be done and how I want it to look. I've already started using some of those ideas to make the entity AI system that exists in the API already to make it functional and work as expected. And we're going to do the same thing here. But I do want to stress, though, before some of you start thinking that that we've somehow achieved the impossible here. This does not mean that you'll be able to install a plugin on the server and have the blocker item. And people will join your server and you'll get that blocker item magically. That's not how it will function. You will still need the Sponge mod installed on the client as well as the plugin installed. But for a lot of people that don't want to dive into the Forge mod development or don't want to spend the time to learn how the Minecraft internals work, I think that this will be a huge blessing to them. And obviously, at the start, it'll be basic blocks and items. If they want to do anything that's fancy with like the rendering effects, then obviously you can still have your plugin depend upon the Forge sources and be able to work from there. I am at this time. I'm not entirely sure about if well, I should say, I've always stated in the past that Sponge Vanilla was never going to go on the client. That hasn't changed. So it's going to be interesting to see how we're going to structure the client stuff, because it's really only meant to work if you have SpongeForge and you're using SpongeForge on your client. But we're going to take it baby steps with the client stuff. So blocks and items at first. We'll see how that goes. Once blocks or items are done, then we'll start taking a look at doing GUI and giving Sponge a full GUI API to use, much like some people have used in mods before. That one's going to be probably one of the most daunting ones to do and do it right. But I have experience with it. Some of the other team members have experience with it, and I'm hoping that I can try and wrangle some of the Forge modders in their community to see if they would be interested in helping me out with it. So yeah, I mean, we've got a lot of huge plans coming for 2016. 2015 went beyond anyone's expectations, I think, at this point. And we got all of our goals that we wanted to do within Beta Build 1000 in the beta release. And, you know, here's to 2016, and I think it's going to be even better. And, you know, when we are talking again in 2017, probably we'll see a much different project and probably a huge and vibrant ecosystem at that point. At least that's what I hope, but I don't see anything that tells me otherwise. So with that said, we're going to go ahead and call close for State of Sponge. This was State of Sponge 8, and at this point we're going to move on to doing Q&A. We've got a number of questions that have came up within the chat. If you can place them again for us, just so that we can see them and, you know, and get them answered. And yeah, so here we go. Let's go on to Q&A, and thanks again, guys, for being with us today.
As always, feel free to just post any questions you have in the Twitch chat, or you can tweet us to us on Twitter @SpongePowered, and we'll just answer whatever questions you have. Feel free to keep messing about on the server while you're at it.
Yep.
Okay, so question we have from a bit earlier on. Marth Gamer was asking, do you think Sponge will have an MCPE variant?
Not at this. Well, oh, do you think we will have one? Well, that's really hard to say because the future is never set in stone. So I mean, I won't say it's impossible, but I mean, if you were to ask me, do I have plans for it, I would say the answer at this point is no. But you know, that could change 2 months from now, 6 months from now. So I gotta stay tuned and see what happens.
The other thing I'll bring up is that it is entirely possible to have MCP clients log into a PC server. So there have been several proxy implementations out there. The one I know of is DragonNet's Dragon Proxy. So with those, basically you set up a proxy server and it just converts the protocol layers. So you can have a PC world running Sponge with all the Sponge plugins and just use a proxy to allow PE clients to access it. Of course, that stuff's beyond the realm of Sponge, so we can't give any guarantees. But I do know from experience it's definitely possible to use Sponge plugins on a Minecraft PE client. So we have another question here. Will this be Xbox One? I'm fairly certain we can confidently say no. Sponge will not be on Xbox One, not unless Microsoft somehow decides to open up servers. What other questions do we have at the moment? ETA on FLAD servers. Inscrutable?
Is it possible? I do not know. We must conduct some experiments.
So you
I would
heard
say
it
it's
here
probably
first.
possible.
It's possible, but we don't have an ETA on FLAD service at present.
I think the last time we had a FLAD plugin, it killed the server.
Here, Socratic Phoenix asks, basically, how does I data? I've tried to step into the realm of custom data, but I'd really like a concrete example. So, Gabzu, you'd probably be the best to go with this one.
I'm sorry, I totally mixed out the question.
I was about to say this one might actually be best. Be best if it was actually just made a reply to that issue, and then that way there's kind of a showing of it.
Is custom data still broken at the moment with retrieving it?
Probably, because I haven't bothered actually
You haven't got around
testing
to it yet. Got you.
At least on item stacks, I know it's broken. I'm not sure about entities.
Now, this next question actually goes in line with that one too, and I'll go ahead and read that one off. And so, Limit Gaming asked me earlier when I brought up the mana example. They asked how it would be saved, and does the plugin have to manage that by itself and save it to Hokum file or database, or is it saved to vanilla player file? That's going to be for you, Gabby.
So there's actually multiple options that you have. If you want to use the custom data to save it to the player file, that's perfectly well, all fine and dandy. You can. The only difference is that when you have your custom data, you must abide by the contract that your data manipulator and immutable data manipulator properly implements the toContainer method. The toContainer method basically is just a map of string to object of what your data is, so that when read by your data builder that you also have to implement is deserialized properly. Now, your data builder likewise has to be able to take in a data view and be able to deserialize, going exactly in reverse from as your data manipulator is serializing to reconstruct your data manipulator. Though for data manipulators, it's actually an interface for data manipulator builders, because the way that serialization works with custom data is that it requests, you must be able to create a raw data manipulator without any predefined, with predefined data. All that has to be registered in the data manager that is accessible in through the Sponge Static Singleton class. Aside from that, the custom data can be offered to entities and tile entities and item stacks. But if you wanted to have, for example, multi-server, then of course you may have to do some plumbing where instead of using custom data, you just send it to database or flat file, either or.
Okay. So the next question, so that covered what was on our sheet here, but the next question I seen in the chat
Eternos
was...
had one. Will OR have a public API where we can query and download plugins automatically?
That is, yes, it will.
Yep, that's entirely planned.
OR is still in pretty heavy...
It's not a priority. It's not a priority, but first off, we're going to actually try and get OR to be working, and so we can chuck plugins and such on it. But as soon as OR's working, we're going to start switching focus and trying to get that API out there. So go ahead, Aaron.
Okay, the Raspi asks, can the Minecraft lighting be exposed to the API? I remember that Spigot had some setting to disable some rendering for block lighting. Yeah, the short answer is pretty much no. The problem is
that
the
actually don't get too far ahead now. That really depends upon what you're wanting exposed.
We
can
be
careful here.
We can expose lighting information most likely. As for setting lighting, how the game works is that the server sends initial lighting data to the client to help speed up rendering at first, but the client recomputes it when you do things like placing or interacting with the block. So the server really can't control the lighting information that's set on the client, but it's entirely possible that at some point we might expose the lighting information, so you can find out the light level for a particular area or block.
Don't forget that we actually already expose what the server considers to be the lighting values in luminescence properties. It's just those are strictly properties and not data.
Right, they're just properties. Lighting itself is not data because the server just calculates it. The one thing I did want to make a mention of here, so you heard me talk earlier about how we were going to consider doing the client stuff. Now, in the client stuff, it is possible to expose being able to turn off like the client side lighting, which would be interesting to do. Basically, at that point, you say, hey, server, you're doing the lighting. I think that you're going to do it correctly. I'm just going to render whatever you tell me. The problem with doing that system is you would definitely need SpongeForge installed on the client, because the problem is the fact that depending upon the they call it a provider, but we'll call it dimension. Depending upon the dimension that the world is in, you'll actually not get sent the lighting data, which is funny. For the overworld, you get sent the lighting data. For
the Nether, you're not.
The Nether, you're not sent. You're not sent the skylight data because there's multiple. Yes, there's multiple types of lighting data. So you're always sent block light. You're not necessarily sent skylight data. So that in itself is also another issue. But what I would like to do is I would like to provide a way on the client API side of things to basically tell the client, look, you need to stop calculating the lighting and just accept what the server says. It would be an interesting experiment to see if the server is, to see how far the server is wrong or if the server is actually truly correct on it. So I think that pretty much answers that question. So maybe, we'll just say maybe to it. But right now, you can already grab the lighting value of the block using the property system that's already available, which covers what most people would want to do.
Tomudding asks, is there a way to hide players from other players?
Contextual data.
That's right. So currently we have invisibility data in the API, which is just a simple boolean, which toggles it for everybody. Though the interesting thing about that versus a potion effect is that entities are actually removed from the tracker and not sent to the client. So the client doesn't even know it's there at all. So if someone's even if someone's using cheats or something, then they wouldn't be able to see a player made it invisible that way because it's just not spawned for that particular client. Now, as Jiden mentioned, once we have contextual data merged, then you'll be able to set that data, or how it appears, for individual players. So I can make it so a particular entity is visible on my client, but visible for everyone else, or vice versa. Or just any combination of that you want.
Let me see if we had any more.
Jay Stu?
We had a couple more.
It's kind of a statement and a question in one. He's asking about optimizations of server-side things. I think we've covered this in previous SOSs, but you might want to cover it again.
Oh, yes. There are some experimental things that can be done to speed up the game. The problem is you have to balance turning those on and actually breaking vanilla gameplay. As some of you may know, there's a lot of kind of optimizations that Spigot will do in their project. Whereas if you utilize them, then you get more performance, but at the same time you break some vanilla gameplay by doing so. I think the one that comes to mind front and foremost is their changes to growth. Now,
Or
we can
entity
do,
activation. Oh, sorry.
Oh, entity activation. That's another good one. That one would do the same thing. So
There's
basically,
also the tile entity activation in chunks.
Yeah, so tile entity activation. I mean, there's a number of them. We can keep listing them off. But the biggest point here to remember is we can do the same thing. Our system would do it just a little bit differently. Basically, what we do is once we have one of these kind of optimization patches to the game, we can roll those up into Mixin plugin, which a lot of you should remember from past Beta of Sponges, where if you want to, from server admin perspective, you can turn on the Mixin plugin, and if the Mixin plugin's on, then you get the patch that makes the game for more performant. At the same point, you accept that it's going to break vanilla gameplay. By default, if those patches do break vanilla gameplay, then we can have them off, and you can turn them on whenever you want to, which is a really nice feature. So we would do basically any big performance patches as Mixin plugins and leave them up to the server admin's discretion to turn them on with documentation that they are there. So.
And one aspect of that, which I think we've covered before, is that thanks to Mumphrey's Mixin technology, when you disable or enable a feature such as entity activation, then the code is actually not present in what you're running, the final code that gets run by Java. So this means we can add certain experimental features, and if it turns out they don't work, you can just disable them, and the code won't be there at all. It's not just that it's disabled through a configuration option.
Jamie the Coder's got a good question about whether we're going to add a database ORM.
I can talk about that.
There you go. You can do it.
So the issue with ORMs is that there's a lot of different options for Java, and each plugin developer tends to want to use their own different option. So in Sponge, what we've decided to go so far is to only provide the minimal interface necessary to allow any plugin to access databases easily, which is a connection pool. And then each plugin developer, at least for now, has to provide their own ORM or query abstraction like JOOQ or JDBI, whatever, since some people don't even want ORMs. Basically, we're just going to give plugin developers freedom for now.
Alright, Fourfire has a question here to Juden. He's asking about implementing block cellular automata without client-side implementation.
Well, if it requires any resources to show to the client that are not in vanilla, then it would be client-side. It would have to be. But the advantage of using client-side API we provide over just using Forge is you have that nice, clean layer, and you don't have to stumble about the Minecraft code base, which you most definitely will once you start getting into the world of adding custom resources to the game.
Limeth Gaming asks, in Bucket you can send packets to modify the world of individual players and display fake blocks, like signs with text. Would it be possible to produce the same behavior in Sponge?
I think we're going to add methods to the viewer interface and implement them to do such a thing.
That's right. It didn't quite make it in for beta, but at some point we will be adding that ability directly into Sponge itself. So you can already play things like particle effects and sounds to a specific player, which you might have noticed that the note block thing on the server, Client Hacks' plugin, takes advantage of. We'll be adding a similar thing for blocks, so you can just specify that a particular block is only going to be displayed for one player. So sign or whatever block you might like. You'll actually be able to accomplish the same thing with entities once we have contextual data merged. So you can spawn an entity and make it invisible for everyone except a specific player. So effectively creating a entity that's only shown for one player.
Something I just realized that we haven't really gone into. We've already got the existing client-side mod stuff in terms of being able to track who has modified blocks. Adam, do you want to take that away? Just F3?
Are you using
Sorry?
Sponge on your client? Or not?
I'm not using Sponge on my client currently, no.
Okay. So this is a feature that is only available if you have SpongeForge installed on a Forge client installation. Basically, the best way is that you will be able, or the best way to view it is to just put it in your Forge client installation and press F3. And when you look at blocks, you'll notice that we add a couple more things to the debug screen, which is who is the block's owner and who is the last notifier. And we do the same thing for entities too. This is a nice little debug thing that we use in development for us to kind of see what plugins are doing to the world right now. I mean, it's something small, but it has helped us quite a bit with testing the tracking system.
I can't show it right now. There are errors in Sponge Comment, apparently. In the version I've got checked out anyway. I think
No, that's fine.
I've been mucking around with things.
There's a question for you, Gabazoo, about can you add custom data to blocks?
I think people answered it pretty well in the stream, but basically, yes, you will be able to do so, but only if they're tile entities, obviously. Because regular blocks do not have data. They have to be a tile entity for them to actually have, complex data. But regular blocks, I mean, they can have block states, so you can have a series of block states. Though we don't expose adding custom block states because we don't have custom blocks yet. So, but with tile entities, then you'll be able to add a custom entity to, or not custom entity. You'll be able to add custom data to a tile entity. But what I'm hoping that we'll be able to do with the client-side block and custom block and item API is to also be able to tell it that this needs to be a complex block, in which that would actually create a tile entity perhaps, and then that would be able to store complex data. But everyone has to just bear in mind that I'm really just talking off the top of my head about ideas I've had swirling around for a while, and that this would actually require some careful planning on my part, along with some others, about how this is going to go. So take it with a grain of salt, but do know that it is in the cards.
I gave up trying to launch it because I need to do a setup decon workspace because there's an AT change.
Sorry.
I'm not going to do that now.
I merged a PR recently.
Was it to do with scoreboards?
No.
Really? You broke something without it being scoreboards related?
I didn't break anything. I merged someone's PR that had an AT change.
Oh, I can't connect to the demo server anymore. Oh, okay, now I can.
Good on you, Aaron, breaking everything.
If I'd known you were going to do that, I would have made sure that my workspace was compiling before we started.
Wolfseen asked, "What is the state of custom mob AI?" You can extend abstract AI tasks in the API. You can already do some stuff with it. I don't have the Pathfinder exposed yet. So you would need a Pathfinder to be able to really start making entities do some pretty crazy things. But the framework of it is there, and it was kind of a side thing that I was doing. It wasn't really my goal to do it with Phase 1. It just kind of happened just because. So look for more of that in Phase 2 of the AI API, which will be coming this year.
JB Yoshi had a question. It was in the server, but how are the block owner and notifier stored within a block? So Blood's not here right now, but he's the one who does all of the cool tracking stuff that Sponge has. I believe we either store it along with the regular world data or in our own NBT file, but it's in like a compressed format, like using bit shifting, so it doesn't take up much space at all to store the owner and notifier.
Suddenly, silence.
It's standing.
I think at this point we can probably just go ahead and draw the Q&A to a close. And if you guys have any more questions, you don't need a State of Sponge to ask us. You can just come on
Feel free
to
to hop on IRC or just message us on the forums, create a new thread. Happy to respond to questions in any form. And you just want to make this an awesome project for the community to use. Thus far, I'm pretty glad seeing everything that we've had for beta. Everyone seems pretty happy with our announcement, so hope everyone enjoys it.
Yeah, we've definitely had a really good response to it. And that, yes, Luke Flynn, that is what we were talking about. As far as what it'll show when you're in the Forge client and you look at a block. So I guess with that, we'll go ahead and say Q&A is closed up. And
thanks everyone for coming.
Yep, definitely thank you for coming out. And until next time, see you guys later.
Thank you all.